Hey, y'all, welcome back to the podcast solo episode today. And this podcast topic comes directly from you, one of my amazing humans who is a part of my text message community. Sent me a message after I wrote on Instagram that I was looking for podcast topics. Obviously, I have a whole laundry list of topics that I think you guys would enjoy. But the day that the day before am currently recording this, I put out on my Instagram, hey, let me know what you want me to talk about. And you know how the text message box or the question box on social media is like quite short. So sweet. Shout out to AJ. She knows who she is. She sent me a message over on my text message community. So if you're not a part of that, it's 501 222 3362. I send inspirational podcasts. I send some quotes. I give you an update just kind of on how things are going. I really do try to do it every single week, try to send a link to this podcast every single week. So if you're not a part of my podcast community or my text message community, podcast, text community, whatever you want to call it, just send me the word podcast to 501 222 3362. You can send me any comments, questions, concerns. And yes, 100%, it is me. And today's podcast topic came from AJ. So thank you so much. But I'm going to read it verbatim so you know what I'm going to be talking about today. And if you know me at all, you know I'm not a person to take a ton of notes. But every once in a while, I really wanted to think about this topic because I'm like, gosh, what did I do? It happened a while back. And I really wanted to make sure I tried to hit everything. So hopefully this podcast is informational. Some of it you might be like, duh, but other things, who knows? Maybe you can take something from it. And I hope that every week you take something from this podcast. So before I get started, I just appreciate you guys so much. I honest to God, from the bottom of my soul, appreciate you when you send me a message or you share, even if I'll never know that you shared the podcast. It truly does mean the world when you take a moment of your time to send a link to someone else who perhaps needs the podcast. You know, that is really what this is about, is just get the message to someone who needs it, just one human being besides yourself that might need the message. So I totally appreciate that. So what is today's topic? This was a text message that AJ sent me and said, hey, you asked for podcast ideas, and I would love to hear about the tools you use and your mindful practice when you're struggling. You talk a lot about your history and digging out and doing the work. And I know you had a rough couple weeks a few months ago. And I would just love to hear about the steps you take and the diligence you have in exercise in recalibrating your mindset and your perspective. So basically, a few weeks ago, a few of my clients knew, maybe some of you on social media knew. I think I put out a post that basically said, hey, I know I've been kind of quiet on social media for the last week. I just kind of have a lot of things going on. And even though I am, and I do come off as, a hard ass bitch sometimes, I'm a human being. Like, I have feelings. I have a tendency, and I don't know about you, but like everyone is different, right? Like some people, when they're overwhelmed, stressed out, mad, whatever, they react in a certain way. When I am overwhelmed and stressed out, I really kind of go more towards being angry than being sad. It's just my personality, it's just who I am. That's how I kind of have my feelings. But I will say, I think the situation that AJ was talking about when I had posted on social media a few weeks ago, that I just had a lot of things going on behind the scenes of real life, which it really doesn't matter. But I hope you do realize and know that, like, I am a human being, 100%, just like you are too. And even though I showcase a lot of my life on social media, and just because like my life is actually really awesome 80 something percent of the time, I also have really bad days. I also have days where I don't want to show up. And sometimes there's situations that are happening where I really don't show up as well as I probably normally do on social media and to, just the public, because I am struggling behind the scenes. In this certain situation, it really doesn't actually matter what's happening. But I think the question from her, which I'm hoping some of you all want to know as well, because we're all human beings doing a human thing, and we are going to struggle. We are going to have hard times. We are going to have shitty ass situations. And I think it's helpful to learn from someone else of maybe maybe I'm going to list 20 things today, and maybe you already know 18 of them, but perhaps there's two things that you can take away that help you through a hard time. Or perhaps you can, start a conversation with a friend after listening to this podcast, because I truly do this podcast because I want to help. So I thought that question from AJ was amazing. If you guys ever have questions for me specifically, you can always text them to me, send them to me on social media, because I do want to give at least my perspective. Something that I've said on this podcast 100 times, and I'll probably say it again 100 times more, is take what you want and leave with what you don't. And I learned that a long time ago when I was in the golf industry. There's a gentleman at the time, he was very big celebrity in the golf world, and he said that to me. He's like, be a sponge, but take what you want and leave with what you don't. And I think that that is just like with anything. You might be able to take bits and pieces from every single person or from things that you hear, and some of them may work for you and some of them may not. But I'm hoping today's podcast, you're able to take a couple of things away that will really help you when you're going through a hard season or an overwhelming season. And this specific season for me was a solid week where it was just a lot behind the scenes. Again, it doesn't really matter what it was, but it was a lot. And I did my fucking best to get through it. And on the other side of it, and I think that this is just perspective of life, right? On the other side of it, things are fine. But I think when you're in it, it doesn't feel fine. And these were some of the things that I did to get through that week or 10 days that was really hard. So here are a couple things in no magical order. You can do them in any order that you want, but I really wanted to write down a few of these things because I think that they're really helpful, and it helped me. Again, take what you want and leave with what you don't. So the first thing that I will say that I probably am not spectacular at, if I'm going to come right out of the gates at something, is I am not spectacular with letting myself feel it. And I am a person who does have a tendency to go to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, whether that be good or bad. But in this certain situation, I just had to feel all the feels. And I think that that is honestly like a very strong thing to do, even though my tendency has always been to push through a lot of things. But in this certain situation, I just had to feel all the feels. And some of you might be so good at that, and others of you might be going, "Oh girl, I'm not good at that either." So for me, that was like the first thing. I just had to feel it, and I just had to like be okay with being sad and being upset. So the second thing that I'll say, and I've said it 100 times, and I cannot accentuate it enough, that movement during those times was one of the things that saved me. There's no doubt about it. I probably during that week to let's just call it a week span, I probably walked 2 to 3 times a day. And now I know that some people don't have the time for that, but like honestly, like when you're in those type of seasons, I would make time for it, hands down. Like I would get up early. I would use your lunch break. I would do it after dinner. I would do it before the kids go to bed or after they go to bed or whatever. Some sort of movement. For me, if you've been here a minute, you know I am a walker. It is what I do. I need to be outside. It is my saving grace in life. Like after this podcast is over, because it's the middle of the afternoon, I will be going for a walk just to decompress from the day. My job, whether I'm stressed or not stressed, or whether I'm having a great day or a bad day or whatever, my job of being a coach to so many people and holding so many people in different ways is sometimes overwhelming, and it is sometimes stressful. It's the thing that I would choose to do every single day of my life, but some days it's a lot. And so if I don't move that energy out of my body, I will be a very bad human. But you get to decide what your movement is. But I will say, I don't know if there's anyone who can say that movement would be a bad thing, to be honest with you. So, the next thing that I would say is when you're going through a really hard season, find someone that you can talk to. And there's a big caveat here, because oftentimes it's not the people in your family. Sometimes it's not close friends. Perhaps it's not coworkers. You need to have a couple of people who are those go-to people in your life. And I'm the first person to say, I am this person for a lot of people. Like close friends, clients, I am this person. I will say I actually don't have a ton of these people in my life. I have a very, very small handful. And I think perhaps you would agree that, like, the older we get, maybe you're in your 20s listening to this, or maybe you're in your 50s listening to this. But I do think the older that we get and the more self development mindset work that we do, we realize that our circle does have to be smaller. So find that couple of people. Maybe it's a coach, maybe it's a therapist, maybe it's like those one or two people that you know are going to be your person. And I will say, if I'm being 100% honest, oftentimes it's not family. Oftentimes it's not your spouse for every situation. If you've listened to this podcast a while, you'll know that my husband is like literally the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. However, sometimes my husband is not that person and I have to have something else. And so for me in that specific situation, if I were to give you like a personal example, I had like one girlfriend I talked to. I immediately booked a therapy session. And if it persisted any longer, it would have been coach, therapy, coach, therapy, coach, therapy. So for me, like those things are really important. I have those people kind of on retainer to make sure that I can get through certain situations very quickly, because I think for me personally, even though I have to feel it, and there's a bunch of other things that I'm about to talk about, I do think that it's very important for me to be able to get back to my normal self. I'm not telling you to rush through it. Sometimes we have to, but I also think depending on the situation, I want to get back to my highest version of myself. I have always said and will always say that I truly believe that I'm one of the happiest people ever. However, I also have moments where I'm a complete shit show and I'm a disaster. And I will say for my job, and this is probably very true for you listening as well, no matter what you do for an occupation, whether you work in the home or you work in corporate or you're an entrepreneur, one of the things that I've talked about on this podcast before that I think is also very helpful is your ability to compartmentalize. I think a lot of times people look at that as a bad thing. And now don't get me wrong, there is times where people compartmentalize too much, and that is like a crutch. But I will say for myself during that week, I really had to compartmentalize my personal life and my professional life. I do my ultimate best to be with my clients fully, wholeheartedly, as much as I possibly can. Now, I'm human. I'm going to have days where I'm not as high vibe or I'm not as on top of it as I traditionally or typically am. Like no one can be, right? But at the end of the day, my job, when I'm on a client call, my job is to fully be on a client call. I remember I had paid someone for a service, and I don't really want to say what it was just in case ever that person is listening. But I can see that they're not paying attention. And to me, I just think that is so fucking rude. A, I'm paying you. B, that's your job. So like I really do my ultimate best. And again, I'm not perfect. No one is, but I really do my best to make sure that I'm fully like with my client during the time in which my client and I are on a coaching call. So I do think compartmentalizing during certain overwhelming hard moments is really helpful. I would just really ask yourself and have, support around you to make sure that that is not a crutch that you use all the time, because there's a big difference between using it for a moment and a season and being able to witness that that is always what you do. And, I think my job as a coach is really to be able to give that overhead perspective. And I really, as a one-on-one coach, and that's the only thing that I do, I think that I have a very unique ability to be able to see what sometimes a person can't. Obviously, that's why they hire me. But for me, I know my clients inside and out, most of them, especially like my full-time clients. So I'll be able to witness whether it is like, a survival mechanism for like the season, or is the compartmentalization just like almost like a crutch. So you're going to have to ask yourself that. If you don't have outside perspective, you're going to have to ask yourself, is that compartmentalizing actually like a long-term thing, or is it just something that you're using in the moment? So for myself, that was a big part of it. I just had to literally focus all my energy and attention. And I think that that's another thing that I will, I wrote down is, your emotional bandwidth. I will be 100% honest with you. I am pretty darn good at managing my bandwidth and saying no to things, especially when I'm having a hard time. Like, there's certain phone calls I won't take. There's certain things that I'll say no to. Like, I just don't have the emotional bandwidth to do everything. And this isn't probably just me. This is probably you too. And if you pay attention, if you're trying to do all the things for everyone, especially during a hard season, you will probably break faster than you can imagine. And so I would highly, highly encourage you to make sure that you're really looking at your emotional bandwidth and what are you saying yes to when in that moment or in that season of struggle and hard time that you just can't. Like, you just do not have the capacity. Like, I 100% during that week, I did not have the capacity to do anything else. And something that's very hard for me, and my husband will tell you, is I have a hard time asking for help. Actually, my coach would tell you that, my assistant would tell you that. There's a lot of people that would tell you that I have a hard time asking for help. And during that week, I told my husband, I think at least a few times, I can't really remember, it was probably a month or so ago, but I told my husband, I just can't make dinner. Like, I literally just can't make dinner tonight. We'll just either eat something here or you can pick something up, or, my favorite go-to is the ham and turkey sandwich. But it's like, I just did not have the extra emotional bandwidth to do anything else. And I think that, you can make yourself wrong for that, or you can just say that it's a moment, it's a season, and it's just part of it, and give yourself grace for that. So I think that compartmentalization, understanding your emotional bandwidth, being able to say no, being able to ask for help, know all that you can handle during that season. I think another thing too is let the emotions go. I am not a huge crier. Like, I well up with my clients all the time because I'm like kind of an empath, and like I just like get so emotional for them. Even this morning I was doing a coaching call and one of my clients was crying and I'm crying and all the things. But typically I am not a crier. I am more of a yeller than I am a crier. But during that week, it was so overwhelming that I like bawled. Like, I ruined one of Nathan's shirts when he came home from work because I was just at my absolute wit's end. I just couldn't do it anymore. And I let my emotions go. And that's something that I think that some of us, at least, some of us are great at that. And some of us are not so great at that. And I'm not so great at that, if I'm 100% honest with you. There were years when I was so screwed up, and in that initial question where my client AJ had said, that, you talked about doing the work earlier on in your life when I was like in my early 20s, or my late 20s, I guess it was. But one of the things that I have probably never mentioned on this podcast is like, I really didn't have the ability to cry for so many years because I had just kept everything in. And it was like an actual like learning to let those emotions go. And I know that I have a couple clients who would probably agree with that, or perhaps there's a few of you listening to that, that you've just kind of shut things down or pushed things down for so long that it's actually hard. I'm much better at it now. I don't cry a ton, but I also know that like holding that shit in is really, really difficult. My therapist tells me all the time, because I don't know about you guys, but know for a fact where I carry my stress. For me, it is my neck. So if you can ever see my neck is like really like bulging, like with a lot of like the muscles in my neck and stuff like that. And like my therapist can 100% tell, and my coach too, like she can tell when I'm like something, like I'm talking about something that really affects me, because my neck will change and I'll like start grabbing like my neck and my chest and trying to like, if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see us start like massaging my neck. I used a breathing coach for a really long time, but it's really about like letting those emotions go and giving myself permission to let those emotions go. So that's something that I would tell you to do as well. I think something that is helpful but hard in the moment, because sometimes what isn't hard, but in the moment, that I think that's something that is helpful is remembering that it won't last forever. Like, in the moment, it is hard to do. But if you have the ability to kind of step back and realize that the hard season will not last forever. Like that week that was like so fucking shitty. I barely really remember, like I know what it was about, but like I don't remember every moment of it because it's a month removed and it doesn't last forever. But I am going to talk about some things that I have done that you too can do to perhaps hope that those seasons or those moments don't come from that exact same trigger again or that exact same situation. Because there was something that I did that week, and that's why I'm so grateful she asked that question. AJ asked this question, is because there was a couple things that I did that week because I knew, and this comes back to like what I think my main point of this whole podcast is. And if you take one thing from this podcast, I hope that this can be one of it, is that I can control certain things. There's certain things I cannot control. But I have mentioned it on this podcast 100 times, and I'll mention it 100 times again. Personal responsibility is one of the greatest things that you can ever do in your whole entire life. And in a moment where it is hard, it is overwhelming, it is all of the things where it's just a shitty a shitty period of time. One of the greatest things that you can do is decide what is your responsibility and what can you control. Because sometimes in my personal situation, I was so mad at other people and I was so pissed off and so stressed and so hurt, honestly. And for me, that's a really hard word, even though I'm great with my clients at doing this and I'm better, with myself than I've ever been. But that week was really just, I was so hurt and so sad. And yet, you know, it was like a lot of the things that were happening I couldn't change. I couldn't control. I can't make someone do something. And I think that's one of the hardest things too. And tell me if you feel like this is true, but like that's one of the hardest things is because you want someone to do something so badly. But, the older we get, the more we realize that we cannot control anything. Like, I don't know if that's a self-development thing or an age thing or a both or whatever it is, but like, that is a lesson that so many people, a lot of my clients, myself, and, I'm sure you listening and realize that, there's only certain things that, you can control and you can't control what anyone else does, thinks, says, behaves, acts, even though you fucking really want to. But for me, it was like, what is my responsibility in this situation? And what can I control that what can I do now so this doesn't happen again? And that was a big, big part of that really rough week is like, what am I going to put in? What boundaries, what responsibilities, what actions, what things can I do to not let this happen again? Because so much of it was outside of my control, but also there's some pieces of it that are in my control. There are some pieces in it that I can do differently. There are some pieces of it that were my responsibility. And I think that that's one of the greatest things that we can do because we can't force someone to do something else. Like, how many of you listening right now are you listening to this and going, oh my God, if this person would just change this thing, or gosh, I just wish I could change this one thing with one other person, whether it be your family, your children, your spouse, whomever, employee, you can't make anyone do anything. They're going to have to do it, And I think taking responsibility for what you can, and, maybe it's a boundary, maybe it's saying no, maybe it's like literally cutting someone out of your life. Maybe it's doing something that's so fucking hard that you can't imagine doing, but also maybe that's what needs to happen in order to get a different result. And I think looking at the situation and seeing what you can control, what is your part in the situation is actually very, very helpful. And there was certain things that I couldn't control a lot of it, but I also knew what I had to do so it wasn't going to happen again. hard conversations, boundaries. What is my job in this? One of my greatest strengths is also my greatest weaknesses, which I care so much. But sometimes I am going to have to realize, and that was like one of the situations is I'm going to have to realize that like as much as I want to change it and as much as I want to help, I can't make anyone do shit. And so by me acting the way that I was acting or trying to do the things that I was trying to do, weren't really changing the situation. They were just harming me. And I had to realize that like I had to take care of myself and I had to do things differently in order to not feel the way that I felt, which had nothing to do with the other person changing because I can't make that person change. And I think that that was a very, very big lesson that came out of that. And hopefully that'll help you as well. I think something else that I did that week, and I was very open about it, is like, number one, I got a ton of rest. I walked a lot. I had amazing, like I've said all these things, but walked a lot, had amazing boundaries. I did only the fucking bare minimum that I actually had to do. I allowed myself to rest. I allowed myself to say no to like going to do, I think we had like some sort of family thing that I said, babe, I don't have the emotional bandwidth. And I think we had like maybe a work thing. And I was like, I'm so sorry. I just can't do it. I didn't play golf. Like I knew that if I went to play golf, I'd just feel like shit. So I think I just walked and like maybe went to bed early or laid on the couch. And I tried very, very hard to limit my social media, which I think is one of the reasons why, this woman knew that I had mentioned, because I think I posted on my social media like, hey, I know I've been MIA. I just got a lot going on. And so for me, I think giving myself the space off of social media, doing my absolute bare minimum that I had to do. And really for me, it was like, how much energy do I have for client calls today? And besides that, everything else went to the side. If I'm being 100% fucking honest. And maybe for you, it's like taking care of your kids. The house gets to be a wreck and you don't do the extracurricular things. Or maybe it's like you go to work and when you come home, you're just completely maxed out. Maybe you ask for help. Maybe you have someone help you that week. If you have the finances to do it, you have the cleaning lady come pick up the kids or whatever the situation is, it's like, no, it won't last forever, but in that season, you have to ask for help. And like, that's, a beautiful thing, I think, especially for people who have such a hard time asking for help. So for me, it was like off social media, rest, sleep, take time for myself. Like that was just like a thing. And it was like, I didn't want to scroll social media. So I did watch a few shitty shows, to be 100% honest with you. I remember I took a nap. Like I felt like I've been hit by a bus. And so I was just taking a nap and I was just doing the bare minimum. I think a lot of people have a tendency to, go to social media, go to, a habit that they have. Maybe they drink wine, maybe they binge on junk food or whatever it is. Like really, really think about what you're doing. If it's actually like a habit that you have that doesn't actually make you feel better. There's going to be moments where you're going to do that. Like, don't get me wrong. I probably ate a whole fucking pack of licorice if I'm being 100% honest with you. If you guys know, licorice is kind of like my cheap food snack. I don't have any, like that sounds really bad because I actually don't have foods that I don't eat or whatever. But like I don't choose alcohol, but perhaps if you're choosing alcohol, okay, you can choose alcohol, but does it actually make you feel better? I didn't choose to eat, 10 packs of licorice. I probably ate a half a pack of licorice. I probably didn't scroll social media. I probably did for a bit, but then I realized, oh wow, this actually makes me feel way fucking shittier. Or, you watch a shitty show, but then after that, you really like, and this is why I think that some people just think it's easier for you to do. Like, I know that people say, well, it's just so easy for you. And that's one of the things that like just really rubs me the wrong way because I'm just like, no, it's not easy for me. Like showing up consistently isn't easy. Going to the gym every day isn't easy. Doing what I say I'm going to do isn't easy. Eating relatively well isn't easy. Getting 8 or 9 hours of sleep isn't easy. But it's like habits and patterns that I have gotten into because I just decided that I was going to do certain things in my life to get myself to a different position. So to say that it's easy is not necessarily at all the truth. It's just that I have created the habits to show up to it to make it look easy, even when it's not so easy. And I hope that makes sense, but that is actually the truth. And so I think that if you understand that and you know that, like, the easy thing is to eat the carton of ice cream, drink the bottle of wine, and scroll social media. But if you also know that that stuff makes you feel like dog shit, it's like you have to have enough like self awareness to go, okay, I can do this for X amount of time, but like, is this actually making me feel good? And like, instead, figuring out what actually does make you feel good. Maybe it's releasing, maybe it's talking to a friend, maybe it's getting on a coaching call, maybe it's a therapist, maybe it's going for a walk, maybe it's, going to a yoga class, maybe it's like packing up the kids and going to your mom's so you can have a break. Whatever it is, you have to pick that thing that you know ultimately is going to make you feel better. And it is literally not selfish to do that. It's literally one of the greatest things that you can do because we want to get you back to your highest version of yourself. So, another thing that I wrote down is, and I'm not a big journaler, but I know a lot of people are. A lot of people journal things out. You can burn it, you can throw it out, you can do all the things to it. To me, a voice note would be easier because that's like I'm a verbal processor, but I know a lot of people write. So that could be a thing too. You could literally talk to your phone on voice notes, listen to it or not listen to it. One of my not one of my clients, but a lot of my clients who have full-time access to me, they get an app called Voxer. And my clients, there's certain clients that I have that will literally voice note me 3, 4, 5. I've had up to 10 or 12-minute Voxers because it's a verbal process and it's actually getting it like energetically. It's moving that energy from your body into a different capacity. It's getting it out, whether it's yelling, screaming, crying, laughing, whatever, or just processing something, getting it out of your body into something else, or getting like, sometimes I'll be honest with you, sometimes before I even have the ability or the time frame to reply to some of these Voxers that clients send me, it's like they're already like in a completely different spot because they just got it out. So you can do that whether you have me on the other line of or not. You can verbal process things out of your body. You can listen to it again. I sometimes give my clients the action item of, hey, re-listen to what you just sent me, because you're hearing it from the external perspective, which is sometimes so fucking helpful. Like literally, my clients know, some of them I'm like, hey, re-listen to that and then message me back, because I think they're going to get the answer by listening to themselves, which is kind of crazy. But another thing that I think is really helpful too is when you're in these hard times, when you're on a struggle bus, when you're overwhelmed, when something is happening, you have to focus on the small wins. And sometimes like the small win, and obviously I don't struggle with depression and all the things, but part of me does believe that you have the ability to get yourself out of certain things by focusing on the tiniest wins. Sometimes that tiny win is just like going outside for 5 minutes. Sometimes that tiny win is getting dressed. Sometimes that tiny win is journaling. Sometimes that tiny win is, drinking your water, eating healthy, or sending the letter, or doing whatever it is. But focus in on the small wins. A lot of times people think that, you're gonna feel confident or you're gonna like get to this point in time. But I've always said that like confidence comes by taking action. Feeling better comes by taking these small actions, which start to snowball, which starts to pile up. And I think that that's really important. So if you are in like a really bad week or bad season, or you're overwhelmed or whatever it is, focus in on the tiniest of things. And obviously, something that is always on my list is gratitude. Literally, you have to focus in on the gratitude. People, I promise you, I promise, if you paid me for a whole entire year and you got nothing out of it besides being able to focus in on what you're grateful for and everything that is going good rather than what is going wrong in your life, it would be the greatest investment of your life, because those small shifts, I promise you, make the biggest fucking impact in your life. If I can just grant you that one thing for you to just be so consistent on, it is that gratitude. It is finding the good, even in that week where I was having a really rough time. One of the things that I did was gratitude. Again, this isn't easy for me. It's just that I am so in the habit of doing it that it becomes quote unquote easier. But when I was focusing in on the gratitude, even when this week was really shitty, there was abilities that I had to be able to reframe certain things that were happening that were actually like a positive. And you would have never have guessed it. And I wouldn't have guessed it unless I started to reframe things, unless I started to put things in a different perspective. And if I was starting to find the glass half empty instead of the glass half full, right? Like, or wait, that's not it. I was starting to find the glass half full, not glass half empty. You know me, I'm horrible with analogies, but you understand what I'm trying to say, right? It was like, because I was focusing on the gratitude, I was focusing on the reframe, I was focusing, okay, how do I get myself out of this? But again, it goes back to number one, is just let yourself feel it. Like, it's going to take a minute. Maybe it takes you a day, maybe it takes you a few hours, maybe it takes you a few weeks. But if you try some of these things, I promise you, I promise, you'll get out of it. What is good? What is good in your life? That moment, that situation that I was dealing with, where I was just like, I did not have the capacity for much more. There was also fucking tons of stuff in my life that is good. And again, this is kind of like the gratitude, but like, just because this situation was really fucking shitty and hard and bad didn't mean that I didn't have a lot of amazing good things in my life. I have amazing clients. I have a husband who loves me and adores me. I have financial stability in my life. I'm healthy. The sun is shining. I live in Arkansas. I'm an American citizen. Like, there's so much to be grateful for. And I think for me, just focusing in on what was good was helping me get out of it quicker. And I think that that's a big part of it. And, like, I also too, I think something is like, understand where your triggers are. Understand like what makes you kind of go off the deep end. Understand what makes a tiny thing a big thing. And again, some of it isn't in our control, but also know, like, if these situations have a tendency of happening more often than not, you have to understand what is the trigger. Like, I've done this with my clients 100 times, where they'll get into like, this overwhelm type of situation. And sometimes it's from their own doing or their own situations. But my ability for me to be the overhead perspective, to be able to point out like, hey, here's the common denominator that's been happening. Like, this is the actual thing we have to change. And sometimes it's a thing that we can change. Sometimes it's not. Maybe we have to put in some boundaries. Maybe we have to do things differently. But being able to understand what triggers that, I think, is oftentimes very, very helpful. So, and then the last thing that I would say here is, how do you get your mind off of it? How do you focus on something different? Do you go and do something completely, that just brings you joy? That's something to just find good in a shitty situation. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that, because again, it kind of comes to that compartmentalize. The problem or the struggle may not be completely gone, but not everything is horrible. Not everything is bad. And I think if you have the ability to get your mind off of it and focus on something else, like attracts like, and we always talk about that, like, the law of attraction is real. So the more that you can find happiness and joy, abundance, and gratitude in maybe perhaps the smallest thing, that's going to snowball into the next thing. I sometimes feel like I can be pretty judgy when a person can tell me all the things that are wrong, and I can just say like, I don't, say this to strangers or whatever, but like also too, like, how do you reframe everything to be a positive? How do you find the good in the situation? I think the reason why I'm so kind of judgy on that, and obviously I'm not like, publicly judgy, or I'm not judging my clients or anything like that, but I'll see people in certain situations and I'll kind of think to myself like, my God, I have the secret. Here it fucking is. You just have to take it. Because I was once the person who did not have all of the tools that I've shared with you today. And I wish that I could share these tools with other people who don't know how to get out of it, don't know how to get out of the struggle, don't know how to get out of the overwhelm or the upsetness or whatever it is. This is, a list of, 15, 20 things that I talked about today that literally, if you do them, one of them, two of them, all of them, your situation will get better. And I just don't have the compassion that I probably need for someone that chooses, because it really is like this podcast is decide it's your turn. And most people, I won't say every situation because there's always that 1%, but most people have the ability to do at least one thing on this list that will get them closer to what they want and further away from the struggle, the overwhelm, the fear, the anxiety, the stress, all of the things, the depression, all of that. You have to be willing to try one thing. You have to be willing to do one thing. And I think that, once you start doing it, it's going to gain positive momentum. You're going to gain traction to get yourself out of a bad situation. They don't all last forever, but you have to do your part. You have to do something that gets you out of that situation. And sometimes you just have to feel it. And sometimes you have to know it's just a season and it's not going to last forever. But you also have to take personal responsibility. You have to figure out what is yours. You have to choose, what you can do but differently to get a different result. So I just want to say thank you so much to AJ and my text message community. Love you to death. I appreciate you, AJ, and I think I mentioned it on this podcast as well. Client of mine, just so grateful. And I'm just using the initials, so it's definitely not a breach of confidentiality. There's a billion of them out there, and it really wasn't her stories. They were all mine. But I thank you so much for that question. And I thank each and every one of you who are part of my text message community. For those of you who listen to this podcast and share it with one person, perhaps you're also a person who has graciously decided to give us a review and a 5-star. That allows the podcast to keep going. I can't believe it's been 3.5 years. This upcoming February will be 4 years. How is that humanly possible? I don't know. I don't feel a year over, 28. I probably look a year over 50, and I'm not there yet. No, all of that to be said, I appreciate you guys so, so much. I hope this podcast helped. Please do let me know anything else you want me to talk about. Let me know if this podcast helped, if you can take anything from it. I appreciate you guys more than you'll ever know. And don't forget, you have the power to decide it's your turn.